and I'm happy to welcome you today to the Hinckley Institute for MLK Week celebration edition of Remaining the Conversation. Where do we go from here? But before we begin, I want to take a moment to read the University of Utah's land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that this land, which is named for the Ute tribe, is a traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. The University of Utah recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect the sovereign relationship between tribes, the state, and the federal government, and we affirm the University of Utah commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach activities. So, more than a half a century after Dr. King wrote his first draft of his last book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? Many are still asking the same question. Challenges continue to persist, creating inequity and fueling divisions and conflict. But the University of Utah is committed to answering Dr. King's questions with actions that are committed to reinforcing and deepening our connections, which is building a campus community where everyone knows that they belong. In alignment with this year's MLK Week theme at the January installment of Reframing the Conversation series, the panelists today will discuss what may be next in the ongoing fight for civil rights in Utah and across the country. In a moment, I'll introduce our panelists for today's event, but first, I'd like us to acknowledge our wonderful sponsors for this week's event, and that would be the Larry H. And Gail Miller Foundation, L3 Harris, Stadler Rail, and Martha for their support of the 40th anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr. Week at the University of Utah. I also want to acknowledge our fantastic partners here at the Hinckley Institute of Politics, and I will welcome them to the mic to deliver a couple of remarks.
Welcome to today's Hinckley Forum. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan institute at the University of Utah. The Hinckley provides an array of transformative experiences for students through internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley forums seek to foster public discourse and civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. Thank you for joining us today. And now, back to Assistant VP for EDI, Dan Cairo.
Thank you. All right, so let's get started introducing the panelists. So it is my pleasure to introduce for today's discussion, Ms. Emma Houston, the university's Chief Diversity Officer and Assistant Vice President for EDI, a wonderful colleague that brings significant experience in working with teams to create inclusive spaces and advance diversity, equity, and inclusion to create positive impact across the community. She's a longtime community advocate and volunteer who serves on several boards and commissions. AVP Houston is a former diversity and inclusion director at the Salt Lake Community Government and County Government, and former chair of the Utah MLK Junior Human Rights Commission, and a member of the Utah COVID-19 Task Force. She was honored in 2022 by the Individual Human Rights Day Award by the Human Rights Commission of Salt Lake City in the mayor's office, and this was in December of 2022. Yes, I think that's pretty awesome. Thank you to our panelists here joining us today. And our first panelist today is Byron Russell, who is following years of experience in academics, national and international politics, journalism. That part? All right. Hey, look at us. Here you go. Welcome.
Okay.
There you
You're
go.
good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
It's the snow, y'all. It's cold.
That's okay. Good morning, and good morning. No, this is afternoon, is it not? It is afternoon. Good afternoon, and thank you, Daniel, for that introduction. Appreciate that, and that welcome as well from William. So it is definitely my pleasure to be here with you all today. I'm going to introduce our panelists who will be sharing some conversation with us. Okay, we're going to start with Byron Russell. I call him my brother, my friend, Byron Russell. Byron Russell, who following years of experience in academics, national and international politics, journalism, fundraising, banking, higher education, public relations, philanthropy, and social advocacy and enterprise, founded Byron Russell LLC and Byron Russell Venture Partners. Utah became home for Mr. Russell in 1992 while he was in development for the Utah Symphony, launching the Zoo Arts and Parks campaign. He went on to serve as vice president for Zions Bank, then as a loan executive to Salt Lake Chamber, where he created new programs and planning for Salt Lake Cultural District, and then became vice president of development at Western Governors University. Byron has served on several boards and commissions, including as co-chair of the Utah Multicultural Commission, chair of the PBS Utah, and president of the Alta Club, as well as the Salt Lake Education Foundation and others. Recently, Mr. Russell has been involved with the establishment of Redemption Bank, the only minority depository institution between Los Angeles and the Mississippi, and will serve on the board upon its creation. Mr. Byron Russell. Thank you. Eddie Thompson Jr., a graduate of the University of Utah, class of 2004, yay, has worked 18 years at L3 Harris Technology. He serves as the Western Region Director for L3 Harris, Employees of African Descent, Employee Resource Group at L3 Harris. Eddie is passionate about his community, serving as an advisor on the Utah Martin Luther King Human Rights Commission, as a member of the Reverend Francis A. Davis Scholarship Foundation, and with the University of Utah Alumni Board of Governors. Eddie works tirelessly to unite the community, build bridges, educate through book clubs, community volunteering opportunities, through the LEAD initiative, okay, advocacy, directing Black history programs, and providing opportunities for our youth. Eddie is the son of Mr. Ed Thompson Jr. Eddie is the son of Mr. Ed Thompson Sr. and former education specialist, Dr. Jackie Thompson. He is the husband to Carmen. Ooh, don't start no rumor. He is the wife of Carmen Thompson and father of 2 lovely daughters and a son. Thank you, Eddie. Dr. Ethan Cortez Lopez, the Director of Research and Climate in the Division of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the University of Utah, and an Assistant Professor in the Department of Education, Leadership, and Policy in the College of Education. His work examines the institutional barriers that influence college students' departure and affect college access for students of color. He brings more than a decade of experience in higher education to his research and practice, including his previous position with the Utah System of Higher Education, USHE. As a special projects coordinator at USHE, Cortez Lopez oversaw the statewide transfer site, Senate Bill 196, Concurrent Enrollment QL Mathematic Competency Initiative. That sounds, I'm just saying, I wanted him to look around and I get that right, okay. And provided expertise on transfer-related policies and initiatives. He is the author of several research papers focused on transfer students' experiences, national reverse credit transfer initiatives, and equity assessment, as well as access to higher education for incarcerated persons. And Eridu Kanta.
Eridu Kunda.
Speaking to the microphone.
Eridu Kunda.
Names are so important, and when I mispronounce, I want to apologize. So please, thank you for the correct pronunciation. I'm going to work on that. A 4th-year student, double majoring in political science and gender studies while at the U. She participated in Operation Success, served as a School for Culture and Social Transformation student ambassador, and worked on the groundbreaking Dignity Index coding team. Era Du Kanta, I'm going to get it, plans to become a civil rights attorney where she can advocate for marginalized communities, challenge systemic injustices, and work towards a more equitable and inclusive society. Please welcome our panelists today. Okay, so I am going to start with Dr. Cortez Lopez. So I know you worked a good deal in higher education around the state, both here at the University of Utah and in your previous role with USHE. What can you tell us about access to higher education, especially for communities that have been historically underrepresented in colleges and in universities? Is access becoming more widely available? And can you explain why this matters?
Well, thank you for that question. First of all, thank you, the DI Division and the Hinckley Institute, for putting this very important panel today. Important because just given the current affairs of higher education across the nation where we are, so it's very important to the question that Ms. Emma asked. I want to start first with the importance here of higher education, having a degree, having access to higher education, having a degree, right? So usually the system of higher education put on a report a while back and really talked about the importance of, of a higher education degree, of a bachelor's certificate. Anyone with an actual degree, over their lifetime, they're going to earn about $1 million more than someone without a college degree. So that number is very important, and I'm going to make a point here. We're just giving some numbers to begin with, so that way we could kind of assess where we are. So that's one point. Another thing we have to understand is that in order to provide those opportunities, we have to have access to education opportunities. It's not about determining who needs it, who doesn't. It's about giving wide access to everyone. It's just good practice. Another thing to consider is that within Utah, we know that we have at least 4 school districts that are predominantly students of color. About over 50% of their population is students of color, are students of color. So then what does that mean, right? What does that mean for higher education? That means that we're going to get those students, and we're already getting some of them, right? And we're not getting some of them as well. So there's that. Another thing I would like to point out is that specifically when we look at historically marginalized student populations or just marginalized populations, we got to look at also the intersection of education and workforce, right? So in the Wasatch Front, we know that over 50% of women are engaged in the workforce, and at the same time, we know that they're experiencing, a equity gap with salaries, and also we know they're underrepresented in mid to upper level administration. Now, what does that say as well, right? What does that say about what do we need to do in terms of providing, access to higher education, opportunities to higher education? So I'm going to put those statistics out there. We also know that the college age going population, 18 to 24 in the state of Utah, is going to double between 2022 and 2066. That's 18 to 24. About 30% of our student population, of underrepresented student population, is represented, overall in terms of overall the population in Utah, are in schools right now. So with that question, I think we have to analyze that the important factor here is that we need to make sure that we're creating wide access to education opportunities. Right now, some of us might argue that some of those opportunities are already being created, and I'll say, yeah, the U has some great opportunities, right? The Utah System of Higher Education just went ahead and is going to remove the fee for the application, college admissions, which I think is very important for low-income communities, especially for communities who are historically underserved. And also, at the same time, we still have a long way to go, right? We have about, I want to say, close to 30% of our students are students of color here at the U, right? Now, give or take, we need to understand what are we doing to support them, right? We have the EDI division, we have initiatives, as well as what are we doing in the community to support student population. So let me just leave it there. One last thing I want to say is that the reality is gruesome, that we actually need to continue to push forward educational access for everyone. Why? Because when we don't do that, our next website developer, our next engineer from Rosa Park won't come here. Our next, generation of thinkers and troubleshooters and problem solvers from Rosa Park, from Glendale, might not come if we don't open up those, if we don't widen the opportunities for college. So what does that mean? That means that we are also left out with those type of gains from those individual communities, from individual students. So I just want to pose that as we move forward, let's think about how do we address those concerns that we have, right?
Thank you. Thank you. Now, this question is for everyone. I wonder what you are seeing from your own vantage point in banking and development, in technology, and in education. We have a good range of perspectives represented in this panel today. So what sorts of pressures and tensions are you seeing in the Utah climate? And where are those pressure points that might become more serious in the coming years? Who'd like to take that first?
Thank you. Thank you for having us today. I think one of the, I'll speak loud. One of the things that we see is, like you mentioned, access. I work at L3 Harris Technologies over by the airport. And it's interesting because a lot of people don't realize the opportunities that are available in any company structure to begin with. But for us, we focus on STEM. And so one of the things that we focus on is developing a pipeline for our youth. And I believe you mentioned Glendale, Rose Park area. And so that's in the back of that's right, that's exactly where we're at. And so making sure that we reach the youth, and it's interesting, we developed some relationships there with Bachman Elementary specifically, which is right next to the McDonald's over in Rose Park. During COVID, they were experiencing a situation where they weren't getting the funding that they needed to manage their school for laptops. And it's interesting because my kids just, they go on the East Bench. And I remember this lady specifically saying, on the East Bench, these kids are getting laptops, they're getting all the different resources and tools that they need. And my kids are in that ballpark. And then just right down the street, those kids are experiencing lack of access, lack of mobile hotspots and things of that nature. So we connected with that. Our company was able to work together to provide laptops for those students, making sure that they had the right access. They're already falling behind. COVID, as we know, was a situation where a lot of students had to, work from home or do different things from home, had different struggles. And so one of the things that we want to make sure we're doing is providing access. STEM is kind of a big buzzword these days. And we want to make sure that you don't have to work for L3, but we want you to understand the career paths and opportunities that are available there. Making sure that we represent you, that you see us as not just a corporation, but as people, which we are. And so we'll go out and actually read to these students with a program we call Read Across America. We're trying to grow that program. We have new leadership who may be interested in doing that. So there's a lot of different things that we can be doing to make sure we develop pipelines, obviously in college, but also, developing our youth and young people.
For me, I'm Ira, and I'm from the West Side, specifically Glendale, and I think one of the biggest things is knowledge. Because as a student that comes straight out of Glendale, one of the biggest things that I struggled with personally was not knowing where to go, who to ask, especially because my parents are refugees from Kigoma, Tanzania. They didn't know which way to direct me. And one of my biggest struggles was like, who do I reach out to? And as a huge advocate for education, I think knowledge is crucial, especially for students of all backgrounds. Giving them the right tools and the right resources can help pave that way for these individuals, especially with parents with language barriers and financial barriers, extending extending that line and giving these children like the knowledge to know that higher education is a thing that they can accomplish, and it goes beyond the financial barriers, and that's something that they could look across.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm just so honored to be amongst these incredible individuals, especially in the education field, but I'm most impressed with looking out in this audience, and who knows who else is out online, but I'm seeing people here who are not the people we're preaching to the choir in. And I just want to salute you for being here and asking and listening, because I think that we all need to actually speak with each other and not at each other, and especially when it comes to learning about opportunity. We hear, on our state, we're the fastest growing state, lowest unemployment, greatest economy. And, the superlatives are data driven, and that's true. But what does that mean for the rest of those who are not in those numbers? And the rest meaning everybody, the complete number, the majority, the minority. That means the entire state. So if we have this population of, I think, what is it now? Are we how many millions?
Oh yeah, a little over 3 points.
A little 3.3 million. 2.1% of the population, according to the census, is Black. And, I think that one of the things that we do frame in this period, and Dr. King, I think our memory of him, his actual birthday being yesterday, is that, obviously those of us who do actually study history, when civics was a thing, I don't know if they do that anymore, but Dr. King talked about civil rights, voting rights, and we see those. They're concrete, they're there, they are in our Constitution, they've been adapted to laws, they're in jeopardy. But here's the interesting thing about Dr. King's interest and promotion of rights for all, which was civil rights, great. Voting rights, great. But the minute Dr. King started to speak of financial access and access to a financial greatness, what happened? And I don't want to sound insensitive to anyone who might feel that this history is the case, and maybe it's my assessment, but Dr. King was okay. He was fine when he was talked about civil rights, voting rights, maybe even sitting on the bus, maybe even sitting at a counter. The minute he started talking about access and equality to finance, he actually became the former Dr. King. He became a person who actually is no longer with us, because in my opinion, that's an uncomfortable topic for people. But what's so uncomfortable about actually making our economy complete and whole with everybody participating in it? And hence, I think that, access to capital, especially when the pandemic occurred, maybe some of you are not recipients of the PPP. So we knew that this was an important tool for all of us, but guess what? Ms. Emma and I were on the commission to address the multicultural concerns to the pandemic. And yes, you would imagine health, you would imagine education, and all the social determinants of health that we could predict. But when it came to finance, access to finance, and the underbanked, PPP was a thing that was not our thing. It was not something we had access to. It was not knowledge that we had. And so I think that that's where we should start, which is actually allowing each other to understand the opportunities that are there. And who better than this audience and those who are online or therefore maybe not with us, but to be able to talk about openly why access to everybody, for everybody, is a good thing for the economy, and maybe that's a better thing for Utah.
Okay, thank you.
Just to piggyback on that, it's the access to knowledge is such an important thing, right? And access to knowledge means that you will be able to have access to a lot of resources, right? And not just the resources, but knowing how to use those resources, knowing how to utilize, navigate the systems to get those resources. So that's very important. And to my earlier point, those numbers are important because that I shared, because we're talking about systemic issues and concerns that we have, right? We're talking about in the health, we're talking in education, we're talking, in different sectors. So one of the things, like Byron said, I think it's understanding the inequalities that persist. That's one thing. You need to be able to understand that. What does that mean, right? What does that mean for those that do have access? What does that mean for those that don't have access? Who does, who doesn't, and why? And what needs to happen? Now, the challenges that we have is that often it's easier to not acknowledge these inequities because it becomes a critique of systems and institutions. But the reality is that that's the critique that we need to have, because then we need to know how to create those opportunities, how to deconstruct the systems that we have and create opportunities for access for college. So students, college-going students, have actually taken classes, in high school. They are, on core enrollment. They're taking classes in high school. They're taking, along with college course levels. So when they enter college, they have already, 12 credits, a whole semester, right? Or when students, are transferring from a community college to a four-year institution, they actually have the information they need on how to navigate the transfer process. And not just that, but how to stay, in higher education at the four-year institution, and how the four-year institution needs to support them, right? Now, if we're talking about adult learners who are, 24 and higher, there's another concern that we have. What are we doing to keep them in college, right? How are we rethinking the curriculum for those? And then we have another population of of individuals that have some college, experience, but no college degree. How do we engage them, right? Because if we're talking about economic wealth and economic, prosperity and equity, let's talk about that too. Let's talk about how do we create those systems and those supports to be able to provide people with not only the degrees and support them in college, but also the transition out to the working force, right? Where can they go? Who can they mentor? How can a young individual from Rosa Parks who identifies as Black can come to the U, be supported, get a degree, enter the workforce, have the support needed to have a successful career, to gain the capital, social and capital mobility necessary, right? And also to give back to the community. Those are very important. And the question that was asked, about where do we go from now, chaos or community? Obviously, community is the important one, right? Who do we have in our immediate network that can help us connect the dots and address the inequities that we're seeing, right?
Can I
Yes.
feedback on that? Because that equity portion is critical, right? That's huge. When you're doing the assessment, if somebody's here and you're trying to get them here, and then it comes off as looking a certain way because you're trying to get them here, you can't even have the conversation these days because of the politics and the things that play. And so that's a question that happens often at my company and other companies, I'm sure, of, well, why are they getting this? Why is this happening? They don't understand how to catch folks up. That's a conversation that has to be had, right? That's a critical conversation that we really have to address and can't be afraid to address in order to get to that next step.
Well, thank you all for the information that you shared when we're talking about creating those pathways. How do we access resources? What does equity look like? But then how do we navigate the system itself as a whole? What does that look like, and who's at the table to have that conversation? But also who has not been at the table to identify what does catch up look like? What does that look like? Mr. Russell, I want to ask you about financial tools, and you talked about it a little bit, but basically tools like loans and investments. Mr. Ashley Bell, the CEO of the Redemptive Bank, will be on campus tomorrow for a talk at the Garth Executive Building. But I know you'll also be on the board for Redemptive Bank, and this is the only Black-owned bank in the Rocky Mountain region, correct?
Right.
Correct. I want to give you a chance to explain to the audience why an institution like this is so important here in Utah, both for what it can mean for our communities and for state businesses and the economy. But can you tell us why minority-owned depository institutions like Redemptive Bank are important, and what they do that other traditional banks generally do not?
Well, first of all, I think I was with the governor yesterday, and a couple of people talked about the Utah Way, and I kind of scratched my head thinking, what is that? You try to Google it, and good luck, it's not there. But what is the Utah Way? Well, it's the way we do things here, because as I mentioned, 2.1% of the population is Black. We're starting a Black bank in Utah. That is extraordinary. That is part of that Utah way. And I have to be honest, the bank actually was a vision of Dr. Bernice King, the daughter of Dr. Martin Luther King. And in fact, it was Dr. King's vision for finance access, for finance equality that was unfinished. This is part of that dream becoming a reality. And it's happening here in Utah. Can I repeat? That's happening here in Utah. And here's the thing. So we have to buy the bank, right? It's Holiday Bank and Trust. There were hundreds of Black banks post Reconstruction. But what happened? No one wanted them to succeed. So they said, okay, great. You just lend to each other, and there's no way that you're gonna succeed. And these, banks were exposed to poor loans and processes that were probably not necessarily what we see in oversight from, our regulators. But here is this bank that has zero bad loans. It is in a very wealthy place. But what's exciting about that is that this will be a nationally syndicated bank. A lot of banks and a lot of financial institutions benefit from Black and brown individuals who are in entertainment and sports. We will have members of that community on our board. And we will find ways to make sure that people across the nation who see this as an example, I don't know the last time you've been into a bricks and mortar bank. I don't think you're going to go into this bank. So it will be a heavy presence online. And I think that is unique because who were the people who started this? Well, Scott Anderson of Zions Bank, Gail Miller, Kathy Garf, Jim Sorensen, and if I forget, the Eccles, and so many others, Jackie Zahner. Let's just be honest, what is unique about all of them? They're all white, okay? But here's the thing. They are the ones who are setting the example. They are the foundations who say, you know what, we have the privilege and the ability to do something that is in fact proof of that Utah way thing, that is proof that we can actually have leaders in finance who are perhaps inspirational to students like yourself, because I don't want to sound like I'm being insensitive, but most people are used to those in the national framework of fame being either entertainers or sports leaders. There are so many Black entrepreneurs. There are so many Black bankers. I was one of them, right? And I think that idea of actually emphasizing finance equity, and of course it starts with education. These are the experts in how we get there. But what happens when you get there, right? You're still not in the game. Listen, I'm not a private banking client for Zions Bank, so I didn't have somebody calling me up and helping me, although Scott Anderson did say, hey, Byron, I'm hoping that you'll get your PPP, but he's my friend, right? And that's a difference, but everybody can't have that. So how do we create a system that is enhanced by those who have a philanthropic position, those who have the privilege, and those who see the vision, and then the community then recognizes that, hey, you know what? This is important. This is actually even finance literacy is important too, because a lot of our communities start businesses. Starting a business is starting to own your home and raising your family. You have to understand the business of staying ahead, and that's financial education, financial learning as well. So I do think that having Redemption Bank here is a national example, it's a Utah example, and it's an example that's happening here in that Utah way.
Okay, thank you. The Utah way?
The Utah way. Did I say that?
Yes.
The Utah way.
I still don't know what it is, but I'm just going to keep saying it. And then we can all leave here. We can have our interpretation.
Let us know. We're going to put some defining words with that. So both the governor and President Randall for the University of Utah have recently been talking about the new Utah. So we got another one. A new Utah, a term we now use to reflect the changes. Who knew? To reflect the changes we are seeing in the state. And the older, more populous and diverse Utah we expect to live in 2050. Can you talk about the changes we are seeing around the state and how these may impact the way we answer Dr. King's question? Where do we go from here? Now, that's for everybody. Where do we go from here? And Eddie, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but knowing that by 2020, I was at a meeting today, and the superintendent for Salt Lake City School District said in the past 7 years, 55,000 students, elementary age, no longer are in the state of Utah. 55,000 elementary age students are not in the state of Utah. So when you look at our population, we're getting older instead of younger. So what does that look like when we're talking about where do we go from here, knowing that we're talking about education and technology, and we're talking about financial and entrepreneurship, and bringing so many people to this community that is the new Utah. What does that look like? Miss Esperance.
There's the future.
Miss Esperance, you're the future.
I think the theme of like the MLK week, like where do we go from here, serves like as a powerful call of action. Like we must start today because, like you said, in 2050, if we don't start today, the pattern that we're heading to is going to continue. I think we need to start with our younger children. For example, I know my aunt and my nephew and nieces just moved out of Utah because they're mixed babies. So she's like, they can't relate with this community, they can't relate with this community. Where can they relate? Let's take them elsewhere where there's more people that look like them. But for me personally, I don't think that's the solution, because as a woman of color, if I run, then who's gonna do the job that needs to be done? I think we need to start with the generation now, like myself and my fellow peers. And besides skin color, it starts with positive mindset. It starts with equity. It starts with us now, and we need to engage in less opinion and more for the people that are hurting, the oppressed. And we need to think about what they're going through beyond our own opinion and put the future generation at the front forth of what we're doing now.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
I like Byron's point of, economic empowerment. I've kind of been in more of the community / advocacy space for a long time. But one of the things that is starting to come clear to me is its access, its economic opportunity. He who has the gold makes the rules, right? So understanding, here in Utah, as a growing population, house prices are going up, things are going up. It looks very different from what we remember from the 80s and 90s. It's a very different place, right? And so how do we empower each other? How do we empower our youth to understand the economics of it, to provide the different resources? Growing up here in Utah, I was told, oh, you can be a doctor, lawyer, a teacher, fireman, and it felt limited. But as we are doing a lot of community activities, we're bringing along a lot of different partners. What we're seeing is there are so many different ways to partner. There's so many ways of access and just basic creating parameters to understand different concepts and to put people into contact with the right people. Because there's a lot of opportunities. I like what you said there. Leaving the state, okay, there's other problems, right? But there's so many opportunities here in Utah. It's getting the access to those opportunities. It's understanding where to go, how to navigate. And that's really critical as we move forward.
I might add to that, definitely knowledge acquisition is very important, right? So I'm just going to share an example here from my life. So I'm Mexican. I was born in Mexico, raised in Mexico, came to the States and had a very transnational identity, went back and forth. Come from low income working families background. So me coming to Utah was not something that I was envisioning. I came here to get a degree. But 13 years later, now I'm here. I have a family. I have 2 beautiful daughters and one beautiful, another 5-year-old, Emilio, who's just wonderful. And my partner and I constantly think about what's keeping us in Utah, right? There's definitely a lot of challenges staying in Utah. Let's be honest, right? The state of Utah, in terms of like their spending per pupil, is lower than than most states, right? That is the fact, right? We know that There's challenges around, access to education. We also know that, COVID really revealed a lot of the gaps in access to healthcare for our immigrant populations, and also, migrant populations, as well as our refugee populations. So there's all these things, but also one thing that keeps me grounded here is community. Community, because the community they have created here is not just, people that I met when I came from my PhD program, but we're talking about also professionals that have shared knowledge of how to navigate systems. How do I make sure that my family is taken care of financially? How do I make sure that also that, I have a community that supports me? How do I make sure that, I'm engaged with individuals at the U around different topics and issues, and we are in dialogue, and we're trying to figure out how to move forward. So to me, community is very important. So the other aspect that I keep thinking about about the question that Ms. Emma's asked, is that, we really have to go back and kind of reassess the goal of how do we keep moving forward with our student population, because Salt Lake City in general is more diverse than the whole state, right? Um, but then what are we going to do for the next generation? What are we going to do for those 60% of students, enrolled in 4 school districts, right? What do they need? What kind of support do they need to get here? What kind of support they need to enter, to have financial stability when they hit certain maturity, growth, right? What kind of job and mentoring do they need? What kind of support do they need, with family and with their peers? So it's those questions that we have to ask in communal question, right? How do we engage with each other in ways that we support? How do I, as an individual, in my current position and as a scholar, am able to provide access, right? How do I share that information? And I love that, because every time I talk about, I'm a professor at the U, I always have someone asking me, oh, I have a daughter, I have a son, I have someone that wants to go to college. What do I have to do, right? When I was coming up, I had to figure that out by myself, and it was hard and painful, right? So I have now that expertise, and I share that with people. Well, here, let's talk about your future. Let's talk about where you're in high school. Have you taken concurrent enrollment? Right? Oh no, I haven't. Well, let's talk about that, right? So there's things to wait, but and at the end, we have to look also at brown and black communities here, because they're the ones that are being impacted by policies, by procedures, by institutions. So we have to really think, how do we move forward, and support our communities to better have access to higher education, to financial stability, to the knowledge and the space they need to have longevity.
I love history because I like reading it. I wouldn't want to live in it. I'm serious. Think about, I wouldn't want to live post-Civil War, during the Civil War. I wouldn't want to live as a pioneer walking across, because I know what my job would have been. Just saying, I have a feeling I wouldn't have been in the wagon. And I'm a prima donna. And listen, I mean, I understand why history is so important and so rich. We can actually have a debate. We can talk about things that are not right, that we're trying to fix. We can reimagine where we go from here. We live in the best time on the planet. And I say that as a quote from Barack Obama. We live at the best place at the best time right now, right here. What do we do with it? And how do we move forward? And the reason I think history is so important and to have perspective of it is because it never moves in straight lines, right? So, I mean, just recently, gay marriage, well, isn't that great? Well, then what happens? We attack those, right? What happens when we have, financial success, where they're gonna try to take it away too? But we have to recognize that with some good policy, and I don't want to get into politics, I mean, there's the Institute of Politics, but the thing is that we always have to remember and put history in perspective. And we have to remember that we look to you as individuals, as that's our goal. What is an individual going to do with their very life to impact themselves and others? And I think sometimes we don't differentiate the difference between individual and identity politics, right? We do groups. And guess what? The individual speaks, the individual has needs, but who do we hear? We hear those identity folks who scream and yell and tell us how miserable our lives are, how terrible the other person is or the other side is. And it totally divides us from the purpose of what we are supposed to be doing, especially here in this higher institution of learning. I was born in Washington, D.C., Anacostia, considered one of the poorest places in the country, greatest crime there was. And the only way for me to sit here before you today is because of education. That's it. I look back at those who didn't have that opportunity. My parents didn't graduate from high school, and yet that opportunity was given to me. I don't like to sort of talk about that a lot because I recognize that there is so much for us to do as a community, and I think community really does come together and listen. And I just want to warn you and just tell you, don't listen to the noise. Don't listen to the identity politics. Don't listen to the negativity. Yes, negativity is about truth. And you know what the governor said yesterday? He said, I know that you think I just want you to be nice to me. He says, but I want you to fight. I want you to fight. And we have to fight because it's worth it. And our history has proven to us that when we fight for the right things, we end up at the best time of the history of the country.
Sorry, can I add on to his point?
Yes.
I think moving forward, we need to move away from gatekeeping. And I think that's huge when it comes to the future generation, especially when it comes to if you could help save time and save financial struggles, that helps us youth a lot, especially for the younger generation. For example, finances, stocks, savings, how can we do that? And we ask professionals, oh, what steps did you take? Oh, there's YouTube, there's this. But it's tell us your stories. How did you overcome this barrier? Especially because the inflation is super high and barely coming down and it's back up again. So it's moving away from the gatekeeping and giving us, of course, the learning aspect, of course, but helping us save time and navigate and now go through the struggles that our parents went through because we're in a more developed time, more technology, more resources, giving us and moving away from gatekeeping.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Ms. Esperanza, I want you to kind of expand on that as well. All of the information that you all have shared, definitely. And when we talk about the system, how do you navigate the system? Bless you. How do you navigate the system? What is that? What is the system? We know what the system is, but do we know what the system is? We know what the boundaries, we know what the obstacles are. So for you and your friends and your fellow students, what do you say is the most need in regards of opportunities that you would like to see added to the University of Utah?
I think this question is huge, and one of my biggest things is taking into consideration the different lived circumstances. And that applies when it comes to scholarships, especially not just with race, ethnicity, gender identity. It goes beyond that. There's a lot of scholarship that I look initially at and I'm like, okay, wow, I qualify for this. And then I look at the thread and I'm like, actually, I do not qualify for this. So creating more scholarship opportunities and more opportunities here on campus to grow as different individuals and appreciating the different life circumstances that come with each individual at the University of Utah beyond who we look like on the outside. Because there's so much that comes within an individual, and accepting what comes within and creating policies and scholarships and resources that accept all students. Because I know we talk about equity, but equity comes with so many different aspects as we're growing over time. So how can we do that as in the university if we're not hiring different professionals that understand different stories, accepting students beyond just diversity here at the university, but because of what they bring to the table, beyond what they look like.
Thank you. Thank you.
If I
All
may-
of the I'm sorry.
Sorry, can I add or are we moving on?
Okay, it is 12:51 in the afternoon, but yes.
Just really quick, and I think this goes to history, and I love history here because history puts things into context. That's literally what I'm hearing right now. History puts things into context. So we look at when we ask what's the system, So let's just take a quick tour in history, U.S. history, right? We understand that when the U.S. was founded, there was a foundation of systems processes, procedures, policies, rules, norms created on how to behave, who has access to what, who can own an individual, right? Who can own land, who doesn't own land. So that's actually a system that was created. Like imagine an ecosystem, right? Jurisprudence, education, who had access to it? Only white men, right? For the longest time, right? Who had access to housing? When let's talk about redlining. Let's talk about who had access to loans, right? Let's talk about what systems were put in place to deny the access. So those are history and facts, they're hard facts that we need to understand because that's what's impacting also today. Economic wealth, how was it done? Owning a house. Many brown and black bodies were denied a house, were denied loans by banks, were put in segregated neighborhoods. And when they're trying to move to the suburbs, people that lived in South predominantly white moved out. And that's because there were actual policies in place to incentivize segregation. So when we talk about what the system is, that is the system that we inherit. Is it anyone's fault here? No, just the reality. It's history. But it is our job to be able to reimagine how do we remove, what do we need to remove, what barriers do we need to remove from the system to make it an equitable system.
Yes. Thank you. That was so worth it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We're trying to stay on time, and we appreciate your patience here. We have possibly a moment for one question from the audience. So if there is something burning, and I saw your hand come all the way up, if you could stand for us, please. And if you would like to introduce yourself, we have William coming with a microphone. If you could ask your question, please.
Sorry. Hang on.
Use a big voice.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not used to public speaking, but I know.
And you are?
I'm Toby C. Sorry. I'm a student at the U. So I know a lot of Americans, like in our society, they have a problem with like equality of opportunity versus equality of results. And I just wondered what you guys think about that in terms of like where does one end and where does one begin?
What are you studying?
I study game design, but I just started a political science class.
So are you asking when equality ends, or when are we at a level that we are?
Maybe I should explain a bit better. So there's like equality of opportunity, which is like providing equal opportunity for all Americans, and then equality of results, which is like what we should do to get people to the same level. And a lot of people have a problem with that, like just with capitalism and everything.
So I don't know if any of you have been to Washington, D.C., and you've seen the National Museum of African History. It's so interesting because it isn't a place where you go and you feel beat upon or you feel that knowing this information was important. But it's so tangible to actually see in this story and a half the Constitution, which we celebrate in 250 years, where it is written that we were not a whole person. Okay, and it's history, and it's okay. Don't think that somehow because we learn our history and repeat our history that we can't shape it. And that's the whole point of today. It changed, and we are a whole person. But there is where we started. And it was almost as if you're like, okay, you run a mile, and there's a race, and there's a stadium, and everyone's up on the line, but you have to walk to the stadium before you can even get to the line, and the gun's already gone off. So I think that there is a measurement, and I think opportunity, especially when Thurgood Marshall was on the Supreme Court, obviously that was a big step because we did have to think, and it's not a naughty word to talk about affirmative action. I'm sorry, I'm going to repeat that because it's part of history. There had to be some kind of a fix to the establishment of a document that is admired around the world and wasn't perfected, and it's still a living document. We are still perfecting what equity and opportunity is, and we have to listen to those who yet to see to have it. And thereby, I think your other question is, how do we measure? Like, how do we take opportunity and measure it? Maybe it's a return on investment if you want to. I think that everybody has a different playing field. Everybody's at the starting line a little differently, and we have to be aware of that. We can't just assume that just because you're a star athlete and you really think that that's just the end of it. It's not the case that you can expect everybody to get to the finish line at the same time without some assistance.
Thank you.
But the
Thank you for
conversation
that.
has to be allowed, right? So what we're seeing today in a lot of different cases is a lot of suppression and opposition without the conversation. There's a lot of things that are trying to be tossed off to the side. You got to have the conversation. You have to develop these things. It takes time. It's a process. It's not always affirmative action is the perfect example, right? Where don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's tweak it. Let's fix it. Let's clean it up. But let's not throw it all out. So those are when we get to these talking points politically. We really have to have the deep dive conversation and the people in place that aren't gonna weaponize it and politicize it. You have to have the right people in place, the right leadership to manage these conversations.
I would say we would have to take it. I'm sorry, you have something to
No,
say?
you can go.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah.
I would say let's take it a step back. And what do I mean by that? First, we need to understand that when we talk about equality, opportunity, and there's questions around, well, who needs the support, who needs the resources. Let's be real that everyone here had some type of support to get here, regardless of who you are, right? You could come from an affluent background and you had support because your parents, someone in your family, had the financial means to put you through a school, through a private or public, a great school. You might have had, some tutoring. You might have some support from your parents. Everyone at some point needs a support to get here. Everyone, right? So let's start from there, because that really shapes a conversation about equity and affirmative action. Because often, it is a charged word now, because it says, well, you're creating this space for people that you think can't make it through college without support. No, everyone had support here, right? To one extent to another. So let's take it back. The other thing you have to think about is that access, the quality of access is very important. I think it's very important. I'm going to give you an example here. Let's say you're a high school student, any background, imagine any background, and you hear about concurrent enrollment, but you don't know what that is. No one tells you about it. No one shares information. But you hear friends who are in this class, and somehow they're getting credit. You're in your senior year, that's your last year, and that's it. You can't take it anymore, right? People will say, well, this individual had access to high school, and the outcome is a high school degree. And let's measure that. And this person, from point A to B, made it, has a high school degree. Let's look at it from another perspective. Okay, yeah, but is this person has been prepared for college? Has this person been given the resources to make it to the next transition? Right? So that's why it's important to understand that. And to measure that, there is, we could definitely, everybody it could be subjective. You can say, they have different measuring points, measuring metrics here. But if we look at it from just pure numbers, we do have to measure, the impact that this is having. Why? Because that could tell us where we're going, if we're missing the mark, right? And what needs to happen.
Thank you. Thank you. I know we could have many more questions and many more responses. It is 1:01 in the afternoon now. So I just want to thank everyone, thank our panelists for this discussion today, and for those who are here in person as well as live streaming on this special Reframing the Conversation for the 40th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Week at the University of Utah. Where do we go from here? Today's discussion is part of an entire week of planned events that includes the economic plenary tomorrow and panel on student activism on this Friday. Student activism. For more details on all of this and other EDI events and news, please visit www.diversity.utah.edu, where you can learn more about the MLK Junior Week and how we're building a campus community together where everyone knows they belong. So to our panelists, thank you again. To those in attendance, thank you as well.